So how would I create this Celtic knot curve here in Fusion 360? And we already have our attached canvas here. And I would start with a sketch and sketch a spline. So because some of this is going to be fairly repetitive, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and speed up the video. At these points here, at these intersection points, you should have a spline point close to that overlapping area. Then you make one here in the bend, and then there's an overlapping point and a bend, and so forth. So now that we have our splines, if you don't like the shape, try to avoid adding spline points. You can always click on a spline, right click, and then insert a spline fit point if you forgot anything, if you forgot to make one here at the overlap, for example. And I'll get in a moment to why I want to have one here at the overlap. But you can always also change the shape of your spline by pulling around and scaling these spline handles. So keep that in mind. Instead of adding too many points, try to work with the spline handles. So now, if we look at our spline, of course, it's flat on that sketch plane. So what I'm going to do now, in order to determine how far I need to pull these apart in that vertical axis, which in our case is the y-axis, the green axis here, I'm going to simply make a pipe because it's quick, easy, and cheap to do. And then I can, even though I'm not editing the sketch per se, I haven't right-clicked and chosen edit sketch, I can basically edit the sketch here by selecting a point in the viewport, right-clicking and choosing the move tool. And again, this is going to be a little bit repetitive. So now we have our 3D shape, and it overlaps and winds around each other, but it has a very hard edge look. And instead of let's hide those bodies, instead of this pipe, which is of course round, you could do several things. You could create a plane along a path at the spline end here, pull it all the way to the end, and create a sketch at the end. I'm just going to use a circle here, but it could be basically any profile you can imagine. It could be an ellipse, or it could be yet another spline. And then you could basically create a sweep with that profile along this path. And the difference between this and the pipe tool would be, instead of always using a circle, again, you can use another spline that sweeps along this path. But that could be fraught with a few problems because sweeping doesn't really have good twist control. So if you have the profile laying flat here, you might not end up with a profile laying flat here. It might be twisted. And in general, still, this looks very hard-edged and not very handmade. And the reason for that is that we sweep one cross-section across that entire spline, and it doesn't really change, which makes it look very irregular. So how do we get this irregular shape? So I said earlier I would use these pipes created in the model environment only for visual reference. What I would do is I would do this in the T-spline environment. In the T-spline environment, and I just started one, You have two tools that you could do this with. You could use a sweep, and I'm going to quickly demonstrate how to do that. You could use the same method. You pick your profile, and then you pick your path. And unfortunately, it creates this very nasty kink in here. And right now, if you would click on Finish Form, it wouldn't even convert. And you can see that if you change into box mode, you can see that those surfaces there intersect. And if you try to convert it, it will complain and tell you that it can't convert it. And it also shows you where the problem area is here in these faint red highlights. So that's at the moment why I don't use the sweep tool. Something that I do like about the sweep tool, it gives you a better control of the number of segments around the diameter, which you don't have when you use the pipe tool. So let me undo this. And instead of using the sweep tool, I'm going to use the pipe tool. So the pipe tool is also fairly simple. You just pick your spline again. And within the pipe tool, you can change it from box mode, which is also great to have right in the tool. You can change it to smooth mode. And you can see that it creates this nice transition here where we have this sharp edge in our spline, because they're basically three separate splines that we connected here at the endpoints. It creates this very nice transition here in the end. And you also have some control over the diameter here. And you have some control over what end type you want. If you want it open, and if you leave it open, it converts into a surface. If you close it up, it converts into a solid body. You can also manually close it, which I would probably prefer. And you here have a number of controls that allow you to control the number of segments along its length. So you can do this either globally here, or as I said earlier, the initial spline that we created was actually three separate spines connected at the endpoints. And if you click here at these yellow points, you have control over the number of T-spline segments in each different of these spline segments, which is also nice. But just for the reason that this here creates this nice transition, I would use a pipe in T-spline mode. If I need more edges around the circumference, I would just simply insert an edge here and then weld edges together and weld vertices together wherever necessary. So the reason why I'm using a T-spline is now I can go ahead and add irregularities that make this whole thing look a little bit more hand-made. You can basically click on each and every point and tug and push around on these vertices or on the faces to introduce some irregularities, and you'll have to do that probably more gently than I'm doing this right now. And if you feel you don't have enough control and the irregularities are still too big, you can insert new edges here and have much better control. It's more work, but the end result is going to look much better and more handmade than anything that you can probably do in solid modeling mode. So hopefully this provides you a few good ideas of how to do this, how to create this object and make it look fairly handmade.